Some neighborhoods are defined by white fences and trimmed lawns, others by secrets buried just beneath the surface. In Green Hollow, it wasn't the houses that kept people quiet, it was fear. Fear of fines, fear of gossip, fear of one woman's clipboard. But the truth, you can only control people for so long before something snaps, before the right person pushes back. This is the story of how a forgotten shed, a power-hungry HOA president, and one quiet landowner lit the match that burned it all down. And when the smoke cleared, what stood wasn't just justice, but a neighborhood finally free. It started with the sound of metal tearing through wood, not distant, not muffled, but immediate, raw, and wrong. Mason Grant looked up from his coffee. Sitting in the worn recliner his uncle had left behind, the one with stuffing poking out of the armrest like stubborn secrets. He had only been back in Green Hollow for 3 months. That was long enough to remember the way the morning mist rolled off the Oregon trees, but not long enough to understand how deeply the rot of control had spread here. The sound came again, shrill, metallic, a crunch, a scream of twisting steel. He stood and stepped out onto the porch barefoot. That's when he saw it. A bulldozer, bright yellow, rust-spotted. It sat like a mechanical beast in his backyard, its bucket halfway through what used to be his uncle's old tool shed. But that shed wasn't just wood and nails anymore. Not since he signed the papers. 3 weeks earlier, Mason had quietly offered the space to a joint FBI-DEA task force as temporary evidence storage. Nothing flashy, no high-profile case. Just a safe location while they prepped for a larger takedown. The shed was padlocked, tagged, and clearly marked federal crime scene. Do not cross. The sign was still fluttering, torn in half, caught beneath the bulldozer's tread. Standing in the center of the chaos, hand on her hip, visor tilted like a crown, was Judith Cranmore, president of the Green Hollow HOA, queen of condescension. She was watching the destruction unfold like it was a home renovation show. Her lips curled when she noticed Mason. "Oh," she called out, loud enough for the bulldozer operator to hear. The homeowner finally wakes up. Mason said nothing at first. His eyes scanned the yard. The shed was caved in. Black plastic evidence boxes spilled out like organs. Yellow tape dangled uselessly in the wind. And behind it all, his uncle's land. Scarred. "What the hell are you doing?" Mason's voice was calm. Too calm. "Enforcing community code," Judith replied, with a tone that dripped power. Article 7, Section 4. Non-conforming structures. That shed violates aesthetic standards and was never approved by the HOA Architectural Committee. "That's a federal structure," Mason said. "You just destroyed evidence in an active case." She snorted. "Don't be dramatic. I have federal authorization, paperwork. Agents were in there less than 72 hours ago. You think some sticker makes your junk pile above the rules? This is private community property. We maintain standards here. You're not exempt because you wear flannel and don't answer your emails." Mason stepped forward, fists clenched. But his training kicked in. "Breathe. Don't escalate. Not yet. This is obstruction of justice," he said, voice hardening. "You just committed a federal crime." Judith blinked, her smile twitching. "You're bluffing." He pulled out his phone and dialed. She didn't flinch until the first unmarked SUV pulled up 5 minutes later. 2 agents stepped out, their badges gleaming in the early sun. Judith's eyes widened, just slightly. "Ma'am," one of them said, approaching her slowly. "Did you order this demolition?" "Yes," she said, straightening. "As president of the HOA, you're under federal investigation for the destruction of protected property and possible interference with a narcotics trafficking case." That got her attention. The blood drained from her face, but Judith Cranmore wasn't the type to fold. "Not yet. This is outrageous," she snapped. "This is my community. I have the authority here. You people are just overreaching bureaucrats with no real power in a gated neighborhood." Mason stood behind the agents, silent, watching, not smiling. He didn't need to, because he knew what Judith didn't yet. This wasn't about a shed. This was about the illusion of control and what happens when it finally breaks. The morning after the shed was leveled, Green Hollow was no longer just a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was a media battlefield. By 7:00 three different local news vans were parked outside the HOA clubhouse. By 8:30, the story had hit national cable. By noon, the clip of Judith Cranmore being confronted by federal agents had gone viral. Inside the FBI's Temporary Operations Center, set up in Mason Grant's living room. Of all places, the tone had shifted from shock to focus. Agents moved with quiet urgency, typing, cross-referencing, and trying to assess the extent of the damage. Mason stood by the window, arms crossed, watching his street fill with strangers, holding cameras and microphones. This wasn't the life he had planned when he came back. He just wanted to settle his uncle's estate, maybe fix up the barn, and leave behind his old federal work. But Judith had dragged him and everyone else right back in. Grant. Agent Ramirez called from the dining room table. "You'll want to see this." He walked over and leaned down beside the laptop. Ramirez clicked play on a screen recording of an email retrieved from Judith's personal computer, which the agents had seized under warrant just hours earlier. Subject sovereignty and enforcement. From J. Cranmore at Green Hollow HOA, org, to local counsel at Barnett Legal. Come date, 2 weeks prior. If a property on HOA land is marked by federal signage, but not properly disclosed to the board, do we retain the right to remove it? Asking in context of property integrity and visual compliance. Some of us feel the government is overstepping. We're considering action. Judith had known. She wasn't acting out of ignorance. She was trying to establish what she called sovereignty, her belief that HOA governance could override federal presence. It was absurd. It was dangerous. And now it was criminal. Mason rubbed a hand over his jaw. She didn't bulldoze the shed out of spite, he said. She thought she was defending her territory. She treated federal law like it was a zoning dispute. Ramirez muttered. And she destroyed a key evidence cache in the middle of a multi-state operation. We may never recover it all. As if on cue. Another agent approached with a tablet. We've got her browser history. Deleted files recovered. She was watching videos, sovereign citizen forums, fringe law interpretation sites, even searched, can HOAs override government orders? Mason exhaled slowly. She radicalized herself on HOA power. But that wasn't the worst part. Agent Ramirez clicked to the next tab. She didn't act alone. The screen showed a group chat board, matters only, with 5 HOA members. The thread was filled with Karen-like rhetoric, complaints about government intrusion, non-compliant sheds, unregulated lawn structures. But one message stood out. We'll handle it, if we remove it now. They can't cite us for non-compliance later. Better to ask forgiveness. Greg L., Vice President. Green Hollow, HOA. Judith had support. And not just passive nods, but encouragement. A coordinated plan. Mason stared at the screen. How many knew 3 board members are implicated? 1 contractor. Possibly the HOA's legal counsel. The silence hung thick in the air. This wasn't an isolated mistake. It was conspiracy. Just then, Mason's phone buzzed. A message from his neighbor, Kayla. They just started handing out revised HOA notices. They're threatening to fine people who speak to media. Unreal. Ramirez saw the message. She's trying to regain control. Even now, Mason nodded. Then, it's time we take that control away. He walked to his garage, pulled out an old duffel bag, and opened it. Inside, his credentials dusty, but still valid. Retired. Yes, but not inactive. He turned to Ramirez. I want to speak at the next HOA board meeting. Officially. You think they'll let you in? I don't need permission. Ramirez hesitated, then grinned. Hell, let's make it interesting. I'll bring the warrant. That night, as the sun dipped behind the treetops and the media vans packed up for the evening, Mason wasn't thinking about revenge. He was thinking about the people Judith had bullied into silence, about the neighbors who got fined for Christmas lights, about the elderly couple she evicted for having too many potted plants, and about the law she thought she could bulldoze. Tomorrow, she would find out what federal consequences really looked like. It was standing room only at the Green Hollow Community Clubhouse. Residents, who just days ago wouldn't dare leave their blinds half open for fear of HOA citations, now filled every folding chair. Some stood along the walls, arms crossed, waiting. Others held printouts, emails, HOA violations, photos of destroyed flower beds, and fines for garden gnomes. At the front of the room, the HOA board sat tense behind their folding table. Judith Cranmore, out on pre-trial release, wore a blazer, like armor. Her usual smugness was replaced with tight lips and darting eyes. The vice president, Greg, refused to make eye contact with anyone. The murmur of the crowd quieted as Mason Grant stepped through the back door. He wasn't wearing a badge or a uniform, but his presence cut through the tension like a razor. He held a stack of documents under one arm and a calm that made Judith visibly shrink in her seat. He didn't head for a chair. He walked straight to the podium. "Thank you all for coming," Mason began, his voice even. "I won't waste your time. I'm here tonight as the legal owner of the property at the center of the shed incident, and more importantly, as a witness to what your leadership has done." Judith started to rise, but Agent Ramirez, seated near the side, gave her a slight shake of the head. "Sit." The shed that was destroyed, Mason continued, was not an abandoned structure. It was a federal evidence site legally marked, secured, and under protection. Its destruction has obstructed an active investigation into a nationwide narcotics ring. That alone is criminal. Gasps rippled through the room. A few residents turned toward Judith, some mouthing, "You knew." "But it doesn't stop there," Mason said, lifting the documents. "We now have evidence that Ms. Cranmore and other board members coordinated that destruction intentionally. Emails, chat logs, a pattern of willful misconduct, not just against the federal government but against the residents of this community." He laid out examples: fines levied without due process, citations issued for political yard signs days before local elections, HOA funds used to landscape Judith's personal property, while other residents were denied basic maintenance. "And then there's this," Mason said, holding up a single printed message, a forwarded email in which Ms. Cranmore refers to a resident as, and I quote, "a destabilizing influence who should consider relocating." He let the silence do its work. "This neighborhood deserves better." For the first time in years, someone clapped, then another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted, not in chaos, but in unity, one by one. Residents stood and told their stories. A teacher fined for wind chimes, a veteran threatened over a porch flag, an elderly woman cited for growing herbs in a non-compliant planter. Judith sat motionless as her empire unraveled. Then Agent Ramirez stood and stepped forward. "We'll be issuing formal charges to the board members who participated in the obstruction. Additionally, we'll assist in coordinating a lawful dissolution of this HOA, pending a resident vote." That was when Judith cracked. "You can't dissolve the board," she barked. "You need a 2/3 vote and a certified mediator. This is outrageous." Ramirez turned. "Ma'am, you bulldozed a federal evidence shed. Outrageous doesn't begin to cover it." She lunged forward, but security was already at her side. She was led out the side door, shouting about bylaws and chain of command, even as reporters outside captured her final descent into irrelevance. Back inside, Mason nodded toward the residents. "I won't pretend this fixes everything overnight, but the control is back where it belongs, with the community, not with a tyrant in yoga pants." Laughter broke the tension. Mrs. Collette, the neighborhood's unofficial grandma, stood with tears in her eyes. "We just wanted to feel safe in our own homes. Now, they would, outside." Someone removed the HOA's iron sign and laid it gently in the grass. By morning, A new one stood in its place. Handmade. Simple. Welcome to Green Hollow. HOA free. Since Tuesday. And just like that, order was restored not by law alone, but by truth, resilience, and a neighborhood finally reclaiming its soul.